And so every year, this same text, we could study it every year, though we don't, speaks to our world and our lives. But depending on where we are, it speaks differently and things jump out in a different way. And so this year, the Koshi is framed as what does the case of the blasphemer teach us about who counts in our community, and how does the way we count create or destroy community, and how might it help us create a place for all who want to call it home. It's a strange, recording of a moment, and how it's recorded is also questionable. How it's translated is also questionable. And we'll see all of that being played out in the commentators, because they focus in, depending on who they are, on different aspects of the blasphemer. Remember that Amor is the postscript to the holiness code. It comes as really a collection of laws for maintaining the sanctity, not only of the Kohanim, but of the community. And the blasphemer himself challenges not only how we understand God's presence in the community, but how we manifest God's presence in the community, all of us. So we're going to start. I'm going to have Lisa start right here in reading. I don't know if I had her start last week, but too bad. She's doing it again. We'll listen to the text, and then we'll go back and do a little bit of a shot, fine-tooth combing of the text. Please, Lisa.
There came out among the Israelites one whose mother was Israelite and whose father was Egyptian, and a fight broke out in the camp between the half-Israelite and a certain Israelite. The son of the Israelite woman pronounced the name in blasphemy, and he was brought to Moses. Now his mother's name was Shelomi, daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. And he was placed in custody until the decision of the Lord should be made clear to them.
Okay, so we see what's happening, early morning, and we see what's described and how it's described, which is quite interesting. It's set in a certain context. And this is one of the 5 moments in Torah where they inquire of Adonai. And what does Adonai say? Go ahead.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the blasphemer outside the camp, and let all who were within hearing lay their hands upon his head, and let the whole community stone him.
Right. It's not what you want to hear. And it's very, it's Shirley Jackson-esque, right? The lottery, that story I read as a freshman in high school and always stays with me, because it was the freakiest story. And I thought, wow, this is like an ancient world. Why would you do this? Well, here it is in Torah, smacking us in the face. Go ahead, Elise.
And to the Israelite people speak thus, anyone who blasphemes his God shall bear his guilt. If he also pronounces the name Lord, he shall be put to death. The whole community shall stone him, stranger or citizen. If he has thus pronounced the name, he shall be put to death.
So that's the decision. That's the law. No question about it. And it's egalitarian, right? Stranger or citizen. Okay. And then the next line.
If anyone kills any human being, he shall be put to death.
There you go. All right. So we have to question, as Harold asked before we started, well, wait a minute. We were just told we all stone him to death. And if we stone him to death, we're going to die. What's going on? That's not our main Koshi, but that will come back. When we studied this 5 years ago, we looked at how could anybody, right? Hold on a second. Let me just make sure I'm okay. Son. No, 9 o'clock. I'm just starting it. I love you, son. Bye. I almost got a FaceTime with my grandson, and you people stood in the way of it. Last time we studied this, we studied it trying to almost justify what would it mean that blasphemy could be so horrendous that we could stone this guy to death. That would be the punishment. This time, we're not so concerned. We'll try to understand it a little bit, but our focus is the blasphemer himself and how could it come to this? And what does it mean in implicating him by how he's framed in the story? So I see Raj, Jane, and Michael as, I'm sure, shot questions about the text.
So Rabbi, this is why I think we Jewish people are good with directing movies, because this reminds me of the scene from Scarface, right in the beginning, where they have that whole person being sawed, but you don't really actually see it happen. So people kind of assume that this happened. Here, it basically just talks about that. Let's go and do this. It never. It doesn't say that it actually that people stoned the person to death.
Yes.
So that's basically what comes to me when I read this. This is just a perception, but not really an actual implementation.
Okay. So you could imply that it's perception. Okay. I like that. I like the parallel with Jews are good at, the movie industry. Jane, Michael, then Susan.
I guess I have a question
Yeah.
more than a comment.
Yeah.
It says here, there came a man whose mother was Israelite and whose father was Egyptian. Now Moses himself was not Moses. Moses married a Cushite woman, or whatever. He married outside as well, and nobody seems to have a problem with that. So I'm not exactly sure why this is all of a sudden becoming an issue. This is not
that is the right question. It'll get us back to the Koshi, and we'll go there in a couple of minutes. Michael.
I'm interested in the idea of blasphemy. I see the first time that the half Israelite, which is the son of the Israelite woman, says the word. He says it, kalel or something, in blasphemy. So you assume that he said it in a particular way. But then later in the text, it's actually anyone who blasphemes God shall bear the guilt. Anyone who pronounces the name. So here was the blasphemy, simply saying the name. And are we talking about the name that we no longer know? Did he say it in a particular way? This is my question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We will not really get to it, but the implication of which is, I think the importance, which is, so how could this, and notice, as you say, in verse 11, we have Vayikov ben Haisha Yisraeli. So Vayikov, or in verse 16, Vinokev, comes from the word to pierce, to cut through, as opposed to Vayikalel, which is to curse. So there's something about this cursing which is a piercing. So we will get to that, and I think that's really important. Susan, and then I'm going to put people here.
Well, there's two takes on this. The blasphemer they take outside the camp, so they're removing him from the community again. One, they removed him from the community by calling him a half Israelite. Now they're doing it again, and now they're putting their hands on them, laying their hands. Now, my understanding is from the text that they're laying their hands so they can expiate themselves from being in the presence of and of all their sins for listening to this. One, but then there's another part of me that says, laying on the hands could be a community gathering of giving this man who is going to be stoned to death spiritual sustenance for his death.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's a push. I love your compassion, but I'm about to stone you to death, but I'd like to give you a blessing before I do it. I don't know. But I do think your key point is this. We're taking them outside the camp, and we're all doing it. We're all somehow we're excising or excommunicating this guy because of what he said and did, and At the same time, we are implicated. Our hands are on him, right? So we're implicated. I saw Tom's hand before. I don't know if I still see it though. And then I'm gonna call him Virginia.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Susan answered my question, and that was, what is the deal with the laying on of hands?
Yeah, well, I think she had part answers our question, but I think there may be something else going on.
I mean, if I don't get it. You're doing a priestly blessing like we would do on a Friday night, and,
Right, yeah, right. Is it a priestly blessing or
then they're going to shoot him. You know.
could be something else, right? I got John, Virginia, then Lisa.
I was intrigued by the fact that this half Israelite, which is an interesting concept, if that's an accurate translation, is not named, but the text goes to name his mother.
His mother.
And if I remember correctly, the name Shalomith means peace. So this person is the son of peace.
Yeah.
Is there additional meaning at all?
That's a great question. We're gonna get there in just a moment.
Okay.
We have Virginia, Lisa, and Harry, and then we're gonna go to the text.
Yes, I wonder how come it is equated killing a human being and being put to death with pronouncing the name of God and being put to death. Is it because you are revealing a secret that is as killing God? I really, that parallel is very disturbing.
Yes, it is the question. That it is not our question this week, but we will we'll sort of dabble in it just a bit. How could it be so? Or really put to death? Isn't that overly extreme in any case? I don't want to disagree with you, Lisa, and then Harry.
I was just gonna say the laying of hands is like what you do to an animal before sacrifice.
The laying of hands is like what you do to an animal before sacrifice. Aha. So if you want to confess your sins, remember Azazel not so long ago, couple weeks ago, we put on Azazel, that goat that's going to go to hell or wherever the wilderness demon is, our sins, and we say, ooh, which says in a funny way, you know, maybe we've done the same thing as this poor guy. Harry, and then Arnie.
So I was, what struck me actually in reading this was the emphasis on parentage and, talking about who this person was and his line. And my question was who this applies to. The text says, and this is in verse 16, ish, so anyone who blasphemes, but is it anyone or is it anyone within? So is it a complete outsider? It's clearly someone of the mixed multitude it applies to. Who's in this group of ours and who's outside? So,
right. Yeah, Harry's underscoring the key kosher, which is how do we determine who's in and who's out? And are all among Israel counted the same?
You know, as I listen to this, it's hard for me in many ways to relate to this. And then as I think about it further, this whole concept is alive and well and thriving today. And here's a specific example. We as Reformed Jews are blasphemers to certain other Jews because of how we conduct our affairs. And so who gives them the right to judge us? And what makes what they say credible? Should we accept it? Should we look at it as a joke? How do we deal with this in terms of, do we ignore it because it has no relevance to our life? But it's there.
Right, so how do we count? And I would say it goes, and by the way, right, and are we discounting them as well? Challenging. And it goes so beyond the Jewish community.
Yes.
How are people counted? How do we see, so there's a general, sort of, I think, moral and ethic at stake. Dave, and then I'm going to go to the reverends.
I'm not sure what verse 18 is doing there, unless there's something afterwards.
Oh, there's a lot afterwards, because you know what this is, Dave? This is the lex talionis, right? Right. So eye for eye, tooth for tooth, limb for limb.
Right.
This is the So this is Hammurabi's code adapted.
So this goes on to.
Yeah, that's what it goes on to in the end of the chapter. Yeah. So you know what I should have done. So just to note as we go to the remez, and that may be small for people, Raj. I don't know if you make it a little bigger. I'm thinking, I know you can. I don't know how to do it, but I know you can.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah, Jane, go ahead.
I have a question. I was just, thinking about this, and it says,
That's great.
He said that he pronounced the name in blasphemy. Now, is that the equivalent? I guess the equivalent of taking the Lord's name in vain?
I don't know. I would say no. I would say it sounds like it's worse. And so that's a big question. A real question, which a few people, John, Harry, have tried to underscore is, so who is this person and why is he described as he is? And what does that teach us about how we count in our community, who counts, and how we in fact manifest God's presence? So he is noted as, very interestingly, Vayetze ben Isha Yisraeli, Vehu ben Ish Mitzri b'toch b'nei Yisrael. And there came out, right, the son of an Israelite woman who was the son of an Egyptian among the peoplehood of Israel. So it doesn't seem, and even in the next line, it says, Vayikov ben Haisha Hayisraelit had Hashem. And the son of the Israelite woman pronounced the name. It doesn't say half Israelite any place. It implies it, doesn't say it. So now, how do the commentaries try to help us get through this malaise or this challenge? Who's reading? I have Elaine Chatnick, if she's ready to read. I have her top of my list. So give us it's going to ask Vayetze, right? And he came out. Go ahead.
Hold on, wait a minute. Okay. What does among the Israelites mean? Why tell us this story? Now this is blocked from me. Wait a minute. Can't see it. Hold on. I'm going to do it less. Okay. Now I can do it. Okay. What does among Israelites mean? Why tell us this story now at this point in the text? Rashi.
Right. So the Abravanel is just saying, all right, so why is this here? And that enables me to say, so what just happened before this? We got the commandment for the 12 loaves, what's called the showbread. And that would be like Ed Sullivan, a really good show, right? Showbread is the 12 loaves that are on the table, right? And there's this implication that, among others, B'nai Korach, the sons of Korach, the paradigmatic rebel, said, wait a minute, you're telling me the Kohanim are going to have stale bread? That's what this is about? It's stupid. And so now you'll see the Rashi comment. Go ahead, Elaine.
Rashi, from where did he go out? He went out from the foregoing passage, for he scoffed, saying, and you shall take fine flour and bake 12 loaves thereof, and on the Sabbath you shall arrange it before the Lord. But he taunted, kings are served with hot, fresh baked loaves, not stale 9-day-old bread. This remark was the cause of the fight between him and the Israelites.
Right, so on one hand, the rabbis are implying he's questioning Torah commandments or questioning, right, the framework, right? So maybe that's his point of view of origin or his point of view, and he is thus, having a fight. Could this be a fight between two people about Levitical law? It could be. I think it's a push, but who knows? There's maybe a deeper understanding or a more, I think, sensitive understanding, as you'll see, So look at the Chizkuni, Elaine.
The straightforward answer is that he followed his father's ancestry while Israel was enslaved, but came out after Torah was given.
So this is like a different coming out. It isn't he was straight for a while and now he's gay, or he was gay for a while, now he's straight, or he used to be bi, but what this is, he decided, right? He was an Egyptian, but then he said, they're leaving. I've never really liked it here. I'm out. I'm going to be an Israelite. So Harry, maybe you're right. Maybe he is part of the Erev Rav. Why this is hilarious is, as Jane, I think, said, well, Moses. Well, what do you mean? What about Moses? How did Moses grow up? You know, Moses went to Andover Egyptian prep. Come on. So this all seems a stretch, but again, they're trying to find a reason why he is described in terms that seem to diminish him. So look at the Sifra, which is a classic midrash. That someplace else I just couldn't find it, but it may be in Midrash Rabbah as well. Elaine, give us one more.
From where was he going out? From the court of Moses, for he had sought to pitch his tent in the midst of the camp of Dan. They said to him, by what right do you pitch your tent in Dan? He replied to them, I am descended from a daughter of Dan. They retorted, but the Holy Scripture states, the children of Israel shall pitch their tents by their fathers' houses. So the half-Israelite applied to the court of Moses and lost his case, whereupon he blasphemed.
So now we're getting at origin stories, and we're trying to see, again, is this all midrashic conjecture? Sure. But this is a fascinating, right? So, the oldest midrashim say he was given no place in the tribe. He was not acknowledged as a member or a part of the tribe. So there seems to be some contention about the place. We don't have a lot of stories about how the Erev Rav, that's not true. We have a couple of stories about how the Erev Rav mixed in, meaning the mixed multitude, right? How those people who were, as Everett Fox would translate it, the riffraff, or underdog would translate it, the riffraff, how they, right? So it seems to be the qualification, almost an asterisk, that this guy isn't like everyone else, and though there may be more of him, like him, than we think. All right.
So the idea of diminishing another person to make them lesser than you are somehow elevates me if I do that. Think about that. How obscene is that? And why would we even spend time talking about this other than the fact that it goes on here and now? Look at our borders. Look at what's going on in the world.
Sure. Well, how about this? Look at people every day in their lives, right? How they try to step on other people in order to raise themselves, right? So this is nothing new, but it's disturbing for it to be a primary Torah story. Can we redeem it, or what is it teaching us is the question.
I just have a question about, is there a matrilineal lineage now or just paternal?
Well, so it's a good question. It would seem that it's paternal, that's right. So it would seem to say, well, we know, however, that it got turned around by the rabbis, right? And then it got turned around by the Talmud, right? So how do we determine lineage, right? The Talmud will say, right? We don't know where the father is, but we certainly know where the mother is, because the baby's coming out right there.
And it seems as though this is also a red herring, meaning it's not even the point.
That I think that's correct, right? The point is
it's anybody,
right? It's right, but it isn't,
or says the name,
right? So I agree with you. So why describe it and tell us this?
Earlier, you had mentioned there were several incidents where the Bible records that Moses is stumped. In the other case, one of the other cases, two cases where Moses being stumped actually go to the issue of status. One issue where he's recorded being stumped is a person who gathers wood on the Sabbath.
Yeah, the classic wood gatherer.
The wood gatherer, and the God comes down with a message often.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's a sequel to that. And that is the story of the daughters of Slothcott.
Oh, God. It's a goodie.
And that is also, and that becomes a status story. And in a certain sense, that can be argued to be the antidote to this. Daughters of Slothcott say, we are our father's only inheritors. Are you going to cut us out? The result of that story is that the daughters of that person who gathers wood become lionized by the text.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, your dad did that, but that's not you.
Right.
You want in. And because you want in, we are going to ensure that you have your inheritance. Now, play that story up against this story. This case here, their father was sinful, but he was one of us.
Right.
And there's no issue about, any doubt about the daughters of Slothcott's lineage.
Yes.
Here, the person is quarrelsome, and it's a chance to offload the guy.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So Lloyd is pointing out something crucial, which is this is a case of even the sinful among Israel will be accepted for inheritance of the land, whereas because but in this case, it's because we know where your father came from, you really are other to begin with, and now that you pronounce the name, forget about it. Right, as they say, Raja, in those kind of Godfather movies that you mentioned, right?
But again, I'm looking at number 11.
Yeah.
You can interpret the son of the Israelite woman as either, meaning it could have been either. There are two Israelite women here.
Yeah.
Each of whom has a son. Those sons fight. There's still two Israelite women.
Yes.
So you have to be precise about which one we're speaking. And it's not necessarily the one that you assume.
Yes. I think you are correct. So now let's go further. Right. So it could be. It seems not. But now let's go further into the description and what that means. And how is it that it's framed this way and why? I think Lloyd, of course, is onto it. Look at verse 10. Carol Sharp, can you read for us under verse 10? It says the Abravanel.
Right. The half Israelite is mentioned here first because he started the quarrel.
Right. So they are referring to whenever it says, it says Ben Ha'isha Ha'Yisraeli. That means the guy, the one who was born of just an Israelite mother, not an Israelite father. So they're qualifying that, and it could be the implication of the text. I think it is, but they're saying he started the fight. If we look at the Midrash's backstory, he didn't start the fight. He was enraged by being, ostracized from the community that could have welcomed him in. Robert Alter, Carol.
The verb for the violent altercation is the same as used for the two Hebrew men whom Moses rebukes. It is perhaps the verbal trigger that led Rashi to claim, rather fancifully, that the blasphemer in this episode is the son of the Egyptian taskmaster whom Moses killed.
Come on, you can't get more midrashically creative than that. Who is this guy? Right? This is the guy that Moses threw in the sand and buried real quick when he saw, right? So oh my God. So this guy has reason to curse Adonai. This guy has reason. And I don't know who said it. I think Harry implied it. This is a name we lost a long time ago. But back then, we possessed the power of the name. Everybody who was in earshot, which meant everybody, including the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude who came out of Egypt, because we were all at Sinai. Clarence.
So I'm looking at 15 and 16.
Yep.
And I'm asking, what did this person do to blaspheme?
Yep.
Separate and apart from mentioning the name of God.
Yep.
There are two distinct categories, it appears, one of which has a different punishment.
Yes.
Than naming God in a certain way, which means death.
Yes, yes. So I'm gonna get to that in 3 minutes. 3 minutes. So we're gonna hold off on that. Lloyd.
And I'm going back to the wordplay here.
Yeah,
In the Hebrew, it says, "V'nokev Shem Hashem."
yeah,
Sarner translates nokeva as to pierce, which would have the same root as the word nekeva,
right.
woman who's defined by the fact that women's gonads are pierced.
Yeah,
But that's not the only play on it. If you're dealing with interreligious relations, you have another story in the Bible, and that is the story where Phineas loses it.
yeah,
And he impales essentially a member of the Midianite aristocracy
yeah.
who's hooking up with one of the princes.
Yeah.
of Israel.
Member is the key word there.
Right.
Yeah, right.
But the word that comes up in that story is it's kuba,
Yeah,
chamber.
yeah,
And that is arguably the same root as it appears
could be.
here.
Yeah, yeah.
And one might say that there is a narrative that is being delivered.
Yeah, is this in fact a polemic against, right, the open tent welcome that, of saying, or because what's being established right now is tribal lineage and inheritance of the land. And if we just let anybody in, what's going to happen to that, right? So right? So, right, Pinchas, to cite Pinchas, who violently responded to Omri, right? Right, a piercing of both the right, right. So let me play it out just a little bit more. Look at the Ramban, right? Carol, just give me the Ramban, because now the Ramban is noting something, and I don't. Well, anyway, I'll give me the Ramban, then I'll make my comment.
Okay, according to the Hebrew does not call him a half Israelite, but rather the son of the Israelite woman. The whole point is to teach us that the child of this relationship is not Jewish, even though we have the exact opposite ruling in the Talmud. For this child would be blemished in regards to the priesthood, and even more importantly, does not have Jewish lineage in regards to the division of the land.
Tzlofchad, the daughters of Tzlofchad, the 4 daughters who get a piece of the land, regardless, because it isn't. So again, this is right. There's a lot going on here, and a lot of baggage.
And taking to Ramban, go back to where Ramban is writing against. He is the background of him. He is looking at Spain and he is watching an inquisition, but he's also watching significant segment of the Jewish community opting in.
Right.
Not simply for conversion.
Right.
But they're also opting in for the hierarchy of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And so he is freaked out. And it's sort of like, I may be persecuted, Ramban, but I hold keys to the kingdom and you are no longer eligible.
That's right. Right. So Ramban is actually writing this right in a moment when Marranos are very real. And that if you opt out of, if you decide to side with your Egyptian father, you're not in, you're out.
So who would know in the community the secret name of God? It would probably be a subset of the priesthood or the priesthood, and no one else. And then lo and behold, it was also forgotten by most. So who is it that actually utters it? It could be the son of the Israelite who comes from a priestly family. And maybe this death sentence, if in fact it is for the Most High, the priesthood, the way you have for Aaron's sons.
Yeah, so you could make an argument, as some do, though most don't, but similar, that who would know this name, who would have access to it? Maybe this guy, we don't know who, by the way, we don't know his name, right? Knew the name. Or you could say, we all knew the name. And the mixed multitude was there at Sinai. But what is this doing as we get closer to the land? It's trying to weed out the extraneous, right? It's otherizing.
Right.
It's saying, you don't get a piece, you don't get a piece. We know where you grew up, right? So is it doing that? And what is the power of the name teaching us, right, about this process of, creating a community that's whole and holy? John.
I wasn't sure whether the half Israelite or whatever is he blaspheming or is he calling out to God for justice? Because if you read what Zipper says, it looks like the tribe of Dan doesn't want him there. He then goes for justice to Moses. Moses, disappointingly, does not, overrule Dan. He
Yeah.
gives in to the tribal. And this person is calling for justice. So maybe it wasn't blasphemy, maybe it was an appeal.
Right. So, as Michael implied, and Virginia wanted to know, if he's calling out God's name, simply, isn't he calling on God, save me? Isn't he calling on God, I need justice? God, help me out here, right? Unless he's saying, using the name, right? Unless he's saying something else, right?
And then God tells Moses,
God tells Moses, and in Lloyd's term, all right, awesome. Lloyd clearly was in The Godfather. By the way, I recommend, I just talked about it last night. If you haven't seen The Offer, which is this 10-part miniseries, oh my God, it's the backstory to the making of The Godfather. It is unbelievably good. And what I learned there, I'm sorry for this aside, is that the executive producer of The Godfather was a guy named Al Ruddy, a nice Jewish boy who fought for justice in the best ways and stood up to injustice in the coolest ways. So I would just tell you, really good TV, really good TV. So Artie, and then I'm gonna go back to text.
Looking at this through the lens of today, I know you always say don't do it, but there had to be people in those days that said, am I to be diminished because of who my parentage was? And that concept is alive and well. And it's troubling that the stupidity of it is embraced by so many people. It never goes out of style.
Right. So am I, and let's, the point that Lloyd brought in, the good Remez text, which is the daughters of Tzalilcha, can I be exalted because of who my parents were, or can I transcend my parents' legacy to me and still merit being part of this inheritance? Because it's all about coming together in a new place, this new home. Dave.
There's a hypocrisy in the other defining the other. And
Beautiful.
there's possibly a need in it as well. So that's the rub. I see.
Dave's very astute and very pithy, right? There's a hypocrisy in the other defining the other, right? We were made to be other. We were other. We left as strangers, coming to a new land to find home. And now look what we're doing.
But I know you need laws and you need to define things.
Right.
But let me ask, what's the big deal about God's name?
Yeah. So now, since you brought it up, Dave, you're reading.
Where am I?
Under 11:12, where it says, the son of the Israelite woman pronounced the name in blasphemy. So Sarna, of course, says what we know, what we already mentioned, but the Sarna says?
The Hebrew nakav literally means to pierce.
Right, so it's a piercing. A piercing? The Targum Onkelos, the Aramaic translation, right, and Onkelos's comments says, Onkelos renders it
in Aramaic as Yufaresh. He identified specifically. The force of the two words taken together is he pronounced by cursing blasphemously. Penalty against blasphemy, Elohim lo tikalal, is death as is intimated in Job, where we read that Job's wife urged him to end his life, which had become insufferable by committing blasphemy.
So it seems like eventually it's known that, if you say God's name, just say it, it seems, right? But ufaresh, right? So what's perush? Perush is meaning. So somehow saying God's name conveys its meaning. I say this to kids and they don't get it because they don't know great children's literature. I say, does anybody here know the story of Rumpelstiltskin? When I try to explain this to 10th graders. And they say, something about, I don't know, spinning straw. I said, yeah, what's the message of the story? And I tell them, the name holds the power. If you know Rumpelstiltskin's name, you have just seized or overtaken his unique magic and power. If you know God's name and say it in a way that is diminishing or that's in common parlance profaning, then somehow you have seized a piece of God's power. That's the implication here. Now, do I understand it fully? No, because I don't know, but it seems like that this was such an offense that not only was he, by God, sentenced to stoning, but everybody in earshot, or all Israel, were implicated in the process as well.
But didn't God let his name out of the bag at Sinai to everybody? I mean, didn't he release his name to everybody?
Yeah, and by the time we get to the middle of the desert, who says God's name? The Kohen Gadol, once a year in the Holy of Holies. Nobody else says God's name. Don't even think about it. And eventually, sooner or later, we don't know God's name. Harry.
So this all leads me to wonder whether this little piece of text, which is bizarrely interpolated into the rest of the story, is a gift of the priests of the priestly class.
Yeah.
To undergird their own power, because who else is in charge of saying the name, as you just said?
So Harry,
maybe that explains what we're reading.
Right. So Harry, always looking at socio-historical power plays, is in fact, I think, not wrong, right? Is this a P text, right? The priestly text? Well, it is. So maybe that is what's being played out. Lord.
Going back to the knowledge of names.
Yeah.
You get to the burning bush.
Yeah.
At the burning bush, when you get to burning bush, becomes in the name of Haviah, they did not know. And it's like you look at the text and it's there all the time.
Right.
But God tells Moses, they did not know me by that name.
Yeah.
I'm letting you in. Fast forward, Moses goes ahead and say, again, show me.
Yeah.
And God goes, not so quickly. Then you get to this point here.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, it was a big deal for Moses.
Right.
Twice.
Yeah.
Suddenly you have riffraff.
Right. Right. who either know the name or use the name, right? So right, yeah. So Lord is doing a very good parallel, which is Moses, right? It was revealed to Moses. What's the foundation of our freedom from Egypt? Right? That now God's going to reveal God's name. But God really couldn't reveal God's name wholly or openly because Moses wanted to know it. And Moses was told, you're only going to see my achar, my after effect, my afterwards. So somehow, even Moses couldn't experience or use the name.
And this guy?
And right. And this guy, right? This guy decides to throw the name around, like it's, a common nothing. So now a little more on the name, go to verse 14, 16, right? Skip the Dad to Canaan and go to the Nokev Shem Adonai, which is translated as in verse 16. He pronounces the name Adonai, right? So all those, so this is the dictum, the law, right? That happens here, right? Let me ask who's reading. Jane, give us this, Jane. So it's the altar. You see the altar where Rash has highlighted?
we go. Okay. This act of lèse-majesté aimed at God, who is the very rationale for the existence of the community, is understood to be a threat to the community itself, and so all are to be involved in the execution. This formulation led later to a general ban against pronouncing the name except by the HP on YK.
Yeah, high priest on Yom Kippur. I wanted to fit it in one line. So what are we learning here? We're learning that, interestingly, right? What's the one day that the name is pronounced or was pronounced in ancient Israel? Yom Kippur by the high priest. What did we read 2 weeks ago, as I alluded to? That crazy Azazel text. And now, Jane, read the one above it, Dad Zekanim, because everybody who heard and all are supposed to put their hands on this guy's head. Why? Go ahead.
Upon his head. Why must the witnesses lay hands on his head? For they may have to tell what they heard, and so, to absolve themselves, lay hands upon the blasphemer, like the goat for Azazel.
Hearing someone pronounce the name, and certainly in blasphemy, right? I don't know if I'm going to say this, but why pierce? Because when you say the name in blasphemy, you pierce the heavens, right? The Midrash says.
I have a question, Rabbi. I have a question. In altar, it says, is understood to be a threat to a community itself. Are they talking about God? It says, who is the very rationale for the existence of the community is understood to be a threat to the community itself.
Yeah.
Am I understanding that to be God as a threat to the community itself?
No. You're understanding that, and that anybody, and of all, and as Lloyd put it, this guy, right? Using the name in a way that is not high and holy and reserved for those sacred rite and ritual moments is in fact threatening the well-being of the community of Israel by using the name. Because what's the foundation of our newfound freedom here in the wilderness? It's our commitment to this God that doesn't have a name for us, a God whose name is becoming. And so somehow to use that name in a way that diminishes God diminishes us all. Right? I'm just going to read the Brettler Berlin, which is just the Nokev Shem Adonai. The case was initially puzzling because of the blasphemer's mixed ancestry, but verse 16, as somebody said, renders the decision both Israelites and resident aliens were equally liable for blasphemy. As Clarence said, I now remember who said it before, so if everybody's equally liable, why give us this whole song and dance about who this guy is and how he is, right? A mixed multitude person, right? Lloyd.
So far as laying on the hands, it also becomes later in the text, look further on, it becomes almost an inversion. You also have a laying of the hands by the people of Israel on the Levites, who in turn are laying hands on the animal that they're going to sacrifice. Laying hands on an animal you're going to sacrifice is standard fare. Laying on the hands of the public, it shows that something could go either way. They laid hands on the Levites who are about to be consecrated to God. They directed to lay hands on this person who is to be executed.
Yeah. So as Tom
consecrated to God.
Right. So that's the question, because Tom Landau said somewhat naively, but not. Wait a minute. So are we giving the guy a Birkat Kohanim here? What are we giving this guy? Are we blessing him? Right. As Susan said very compassionately, leads with her heart. Are we saying that this guy is going to get blessed before we stone him to death? I don't think so.
And as far as modes of execution go, I mean, in the realm of the horrific, there's a hierarchy of how you get killed. And stoning is reserved for the bottom, for the dredges.
This is the worst of the worst. To stone a guy to death is the worst of the worst, right? And we're all right. We hear the thumps, we hear the thuds. We're all part of it. We're witness to it. So something about this is scary as all get out, not clearly for the person being executed, but for all of us. Now go to the drive so we can open your eyes a little bit and come back to today. It's Professor Rachel Rosenthal, who I think is still teaching Talmud and at JTS. But we're going to go to the third paragraph. However, Michelle Greenberg, are you ready with this? Harry, do you have a question from before? Go ahead.
I just wanted to make a point about who's included in the text, and maybe to make a point that it's a little broader than sometimes we might think. So in verse 15, when it talks about cursing,
yeah,
it seems to apply to everyone, whoever curses his God, Ishish.
Yeah.
And it's not specific, but verse 16 about blasphemy, whatever exactly that is, I'm still not sure what that is, applies to Israelites and to the ger, to the stranger among you, which is a special status. It's not, it's a special legal status. So it is a little more inclusive, and the person who gets stoned, I mean, thank you very much, I'm part of this community, is not pure Israelite.
Yeah, and so, Harry's onto something that he doesn't even know how brilliant he is, because what does ger mean in addition to stranger, Harry, in rabbinic terms? Convert. So if you chose to align yourself with the people of Israel by going through conversion, it seems like you have a separate status among the people, even though you're fully a Jew, right? It's implied by the text, right? Of course, we would say that's BS, and in fact runs antithetical. And we're going to learn next week that all of us are gerim. Every Israelite is a ger, a stranger. I got Lisa, then I have Michelle.
I'm not sure I understand why God is so strict and so fearful about things like that with Nadab and Abihu, the farm fire, or why he's so afraid if people say his name.
Yeah, so Lisa's asking, why is God so afraid if people say his name? That's not our focus, but I would just say, as it was implied by Alter, that if this name, which is more than a name and more than a concept, it is the unifying idea that implies there is a power that structures and makes sense of the universe. So if you had that name and you screwed around with that name, you are messing around with the central force behind the working of the world. Put that in there, just throw it in there. I've got to read a little text, Michelle, and then I'll go to Michael, I promise. Michelle, go with however.
Okay, I just need, Raj, if you can scroll up.
We'll give you, there you go. Thank you, Raj, thank you.
Okay.
A little more, go Raj up more. Yeah, we're gonna go, yeah, perfect.
However, a closer look at the story shows that it is more complicated than it might originally seem. The Torah points to a number of curious details. In verse 10, the Torah says, and the son of an Israelite woman who was the son of an Egyptian went out among the children in Israel, and the son of the Israelite woman and an Israelite man fought in the camp. There is nothing in the Torah to tell us why this fight began, nor is it clear how the fight led to the son of the Israelite woman blaspheming. We do not know why the man's mother is identified in the following verse, but he himself is never identified. And finally, the question I continue to return to is, why does it matter that this man is half Egyptian?
Right, right.
The Midrashim explore the man's lineage in detail, explaining how his parents' history helps us understand his crime. Vayikra Rabbah explains that this man's father was actually the Egyptian that Moshe killed in Egypt before he ran away and ultimately encountered the burning bush. Because the blasphemer's father was not an Israelite, he had no share in the land and no set place in the camp. Despite having reasonable cause for feeling alienated from the Israelite community, Rambam, quoting the Sifra, claims that he chose to convert by immersing in the mikveh and having a brit milah. However, he still finds himself outside of the community. Thus, the Sifra locates the origin of the dispute between the blasphemer and the Israelite as being about whether the blasphemer has a place with the tribe of Dan, his mother's tribe. Keep going?
Yeah, it's getting good now.
Okay. These midrashim are striking because, whether intentionally or not, they turn the blasphemer into a more sympathetic character. Although there is no attempt to condone the choice to blaspheme, the more the blasphemer's backstory is offered, the easier it is to understand what might have caused him to ultimately curse God. His father was killed by the leader of his community. He is rejected by the tribe where he tries to find a place. He is known as the son of the Egyptian father rather than simply another Israelite. Is it any wonder that he eventually lashes out and curses the deity that rules over the people who shunned him? Surely the blasphemer is responsible for his actions. However, the community is forced to grapple with its culpability as well. In verse 14, God commands that all of the people who heard the man curse God are to lay their hands on his head, mirroring the process that one goes through with an animal that will be sacrificed on their behalf. In part, the laying of the hands signifies their rejection of his actions. The fact that they were present does not mean they condone their actions. However, it also forces them to admit that they were there, and thus that they have a small part in what caused this man to be executed. Perhaps if they had treated this man differently, the situation would not have escalated, God would not have been cursed, and nobody would need to be put to death.
Right. So again, what the giving the backstory or trying to find the backstory, and I think, Harry, you're right, it integrates into the whole text, right? And it's really clear answer to your question. So if everybody has the same law, why are they telling us about the origins of this guy and being so specific about, Ben Ish Yisraelit? So Isha Yisraelit. So why is it that we hear about his mother and his father in this? Because somehow his status in the community was the underlying question, right? We're just going to finish it up and then go to Michael and then we'll.
Although we no longer execute people for blasphemy, the lessons of this story are strikingly relevant today. When we divide our communities in whatever forms they take into insiders and outsiders, we are breeding seeds of pain and rejection that could have unknown consequences. Many of us see ourselves more as the Israelites than as the blasphemer in the story, but that means that we must do better than the Israelites did. We're gonna have to scroll up a little. We must learn from what they did and find a way to open our doors rather than pushing people out. Where around us are people feeling rejected as they try to enter in? Where are we dividing when we could unite? When are we othering people who are really more like us than we might want to admit?
All right, I got Michael then Lloyd.
Well, my thoughts are so confused, but anyway, I'll try. Because this reference, it seems to me, apart from whether this is about whether or not he's truly part of the Israelite people or not, it seems to me what we're talking about is actually the status of God and the status of naming. When we consider that God speaks the universe into being, where everything depends on language, where the name at the burning bush acquires this huge importance, so that somehow, and the blasphemy, it's never clear whether he's actually said something bad about God or he simply mentioned the name. That we have the power of language, the power of naming. We are in the image of God. Somehow there's been an abuse of that power. And I think that somewhere behind this story, there's another story going on, which is a story about language and the power of naming.
Yes, I think you're right. And I think that could be the underlying, we're going to come back to that actually, right? Right? How we name, how we understand the name, right? And what that implies for the names we all, carry, right? Lloyd.
Arguably, what she is doing is engaging in a modern gloss.
Yes.
And at the same time that she is engaging in a modern gloss, she's overlooking, I'll be critical, another text that she might have used. And that is the Eglah Arufah.
Yeah, yeah.
When you find a body in the middle of the road that can't be identified, that can't be allocated a piece of land. They go ahead, the elders of the community put their hands on the neck of the cow and they break its neck.
Yeah.
And they say, it's our fault that it reached this point, that you could have someone just cast here in a no man's land.
Right.
And to give you a sense of that, a priest could defile himself
In order to do that. Yeah.
to bury a body that's found in a no man's land. But moving from there to the comment you made earlier about the hypocrisy of essentially outcasts creating outcasts.
Yeah.
Arguably, or I would argue,
Yeah.
is it hypocrisy or is it irony? Because you then go to the daily, in the traditional liturgy on a weekday morning, you have the taflen.
Yeah.
You fall on your hand, you say, woe is me. But one of the parts on Monday and Thursday is we were thought of as outcast, refuge, and detritus.
Yeah.
Among the nations. So you have inside the club this acknowledgement of history has been harsh on us.
Yeah.
And yet the ethic becomes, we may be persecuted, but we are number one.
Right.
And because we're number one, although we're persecuted, we will still draw markers and exclude.
Yeah. So what it's saying is, there is an ethic that runs through certainly Torah and through rabbinic law that says we are responsible if we come across somebody who has died, and maybe even more importantly, that we have to hold ourselves to a high standard, and B, that in being outcast from Egypt, we don't take that outcast status lightly. In fact, it makes us who we are, right? So somehow we will hold that, right? We are a people apart, to quote, the text. All right, so I'm not going to read the so yet, because I'm going to excerpt the so highly, but I'm going to call on Ellen and then Elaine. Just got to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, I would just like to follow up on Michael's point about language, because I think the most disturbing element of this text, at least for me, is that an act, a crime, which is committed through language, is answered by violence, and by violence where the whole community is being asked to commit a violent act using the body. And to me, that's a primitive response. If the crime is committed through speech, then perhaps the punishment could be through speech. But to ask the whole community to murder somebody for an act of speech, to me, is horrific. I felt impelled to say that.
Yes, no, and I think again, I try to weigh it all against. I think it's well said, and I feel the same, repulsiveness, really repulsed by the text in a way. So we have to ask ourselves a deeper question. Though it's not our Kikoshi today, we're focusing on what is this blasphemer, half Israelite teaching us. But I do think the question remains, and I'm going to get to it at the very end. Elaine.
I want to pick up a little bit on what Harry said, because I think what part of this, or a good part of this, is questioning authority and what the symbol of that authority is. And it reminds me of the controversies around flag burning in the 60s, when authority was being questioned in a lot of ways, and the flag was the symbol of that authority. And therefore, there were people that wanted to burn the flag as their way of demonstrating their attitude toward authority. And in a funny way, I think in a way, this sort of reminds me of that as well, and that the punishment is severe because it seems to me and it could be the priests that I would agree with that, want to point out the severity of questioning authority, which in their terms questions the cohesion of the community, which is so important.
Right, right, a perspective, which I think is an interesting parallel. I'm not even sure how I can get across that that this isn't a flag, right? I agree. I love the parallel historically, but this is the name. This is the foundation of our existence and our hope for the promise of tomorrow. And if you could hold the power of the name, because people like Ellen and Michael are word people professionally, Virginia too, right? So if you have the power of the most powerful word and you use it in a way that not only sullies it, but denies its power, right? Is that not a horrendous crime? Because you've taken away the power of language of every other being in doing that. I know this is theoretical, but it, right? So very hard, but I agree with you. You respond by death? What do you mean? So I'm gonna, can I ask, Hara, would you read this a little bit? You're gonna go to the second page, yeah. Go all the way to, it's a story that doesn't sit well, Hara.
So I just want to remind you of the nursery, the thing we always say as kids, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I always thought that was upside down, and this text proves it.
Yeah, good for you there.
It's a story that doesn't sit well. On the one hand, it reminds us of the power of words and the importance of social norms that recognize the harm words can do. But it's difficult to read this text and not be alert to how marginal the son of the Israelite woman is in this newly forming desert society. According to Rashi on verse 10, the fight itself is triggered by a question of his status and whether there is literally any place for him in this newly forming society. We certainly know that in contemporary times, the status of the speaker often determines who will be heard, who will be held accountable, and who will be allowed to slide past norms. In comparing the NJPS translation to the text, I was surprised to see a choice to translate the Hebrew phrase Ben HaYisraelit, which literally means son of an Israelite woman, as half Israelite. I found the choice jarring and also enlightening. The son of the Israelite woman is made smaller, less than a whole. The choice to split this person into fractions reveals an essential danger with counting people at all. Today, it is somewhat fashionable to divide oneself up. Popular DNA tests offer the promise of an identity calculated in narrow slivers. But in communal projects, people should be counted as wholes. Concepts of hybridity adopted from Mendelian genetics should not apply to human identity. In counting people and turning lives into numbers for analysis, we can uncover important patterns that allow us to better understand ourselves and serve populations of interest. But there is also a danger that this process will lead to taking liberties with people's core humanity. We can't make fractions out of people. Our own country has a terrible legacy of that crime. The 3/5 compromise embedded in the United States founding document is one way in which African Americans have been denied the dignity of wholeness in this country. The story of the blasphemer is an uncomfortable story and one for which I offer no resolution, only to say that it centers how some forms of counting people diminish everyone and the holiness of our entire community. That's different from saying that we always operate as fully integrated selves. Settings and circumstances may bring particular elements of our own heritage and experience to the fore, but those of us with hyphenated identities are whole people. In terms of our dignity and worth, we should always be allowed to be our full selves, each person recognized as a whole. To neglect this unleashes ugliness all around.
Right, so, and I checked out because I thought to myself, well, Dr. Aria Levitas, I wonder if she's, has an interesting background I wonder if she's an African-American Jew or not even close, right? But she did teach at the Brandeis Center, which was for interdenominational understanding. So why is this so compelling for us, and where does it take us to understanding, what it means to create a community that feels like home? Lloyd.
She could have. Again.
Lloyd is frustrated by the last commentary, I can see.
She's right where she talks about you have different standards of justice.
Yeah.
But she, in a sense, she pulls her punch face.
Yeah.
She goes modern as opposed to ancient.
Yeah.
You want a trial that shows someone's status? Go to the Korach story. He goes ahead, goes full on rebellion, takes on Moses. He and the whole lot of them die, but he gets his day in court.
Yeah.
He gets to bring out the fire pans and basically say, and the incense, and it's sort of like, God likes you, he'll take your stuff.
Right.
God likes me, he'll take my stuff.
Right.
On the surface, you have that parity, and he gets his moment in court because he's a Levite. And not only is he a Levite, he's Moses' cousin.
Yeah.
This poor Slav over here,
yeah,
gets immediately detained and just becomes killed.
Yeah. 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 He doesn't get his day in court.
He doesn't get a day in court. And you want to contrast it to someone whose father was a wrongdoer? Daughters of Slavcha.
Yeah.
And in fact, these days, particularly within the modern Orthodox community, and particularly in Israel, the names of the daughters are names that are gladly given.
Yeah.
For children's names.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, listen, Lloyd's point is it certainly is about status. This woman, this JTS professor, is connecting it to what happens in society all the time, what the founding of our country is based on. And as I said to you earlier, I'm going to call it Raj in a minute, we weren't going to solve this problem. And is it Levitas, the last one I just quoted, right, that Harry read? She says, I offer no resolution of this text, right? Which doesn't bring a lot of comfort to Ellen, right? But that's okay. Raja, and then I'm going to make a comment.
So what I'm about to say is definitely going to upset Ellen even more, because the implementation of the blasphemy law in Pakistan, where I come from, it's a friggin' law. I mean, and people actually take this law and implement that, what happened with a Sri Lankan guy? They frustrated the crap out of him. So he basically blasphemed Allah, and 60 or 70 people basically killed him. So, this, by the way, law, the blasphemy law, if you look at the history of it, it was actually implemented by the British, which the Muslims in Pakistan now have actually taken this law and implemented that or made that. So this is like the most craziest thing, which in this day and age we are living with. And I just want to add one thing, but while we are talking about this, my other half of my family, from my father's side, they're all minorities. They're Muslims, but they're a minority. And they're basically ridiculed. I mean, literally on Facebooks and Twitters, if they make a comment about Pakistan or something, they're literally told, oh, your comments don't count because you're an Ahmadi. How diminishing it is. I mean, so, that's the state that we live in.
It's like saying, Raj, oh, they're just sons of the half Israelite woman. Yeah. Harry.
So I do want to come back to one way of reading it and then another way of reading it, just like all Torah. We can read it however, well, in many different ways. So I still want to read this as a text of inclusion, that that people in this group are included in what you're supposed to do. Hearing Raja's description of modern day Pakistan doesn't give me a lot of comfort in this, but given the society in which this is rendered, the idea that the laws are going to include even people who are not sort of full Israelites, I take as important. So I think that's useful. The other thing is, interestingly enough, my Hertz commentary on the quarrel says, the cause of the quarrel is not stated because it is not of material importance. So the desire of commentators, once again, as we do week after week, to find some reason behind all of this and to explain it and to understand it better is just striking. And to view the cause of the quarrel as unimportant also casts a different, sort of pushes the text in a different way.
Yeah, because where does it push the text at? It pushes it back to, doesn't matter why, he said the name
right
in a way that was blasphemous, that perverted or profaned the name.
We're
right?
not
And so
interested in motives, right?
we're not interested in motives, and it doesn't really matter that he's a half Israelite.
Can I just add one other thing about the name?
Yeah.
Just which strikes me here about the difference between speech and text. The name is written in the text all the time. We just don't know how to vocalize it. So there is some, there's something very deep about our connection to text. And it's different than the vocalization. And I'll leave this to Ellen maybe. But I don't know. We're able to capture it in text. And that's actually quite striking when you think about it.
But I think it goes back to what Michael said, which is, and what Lloyd said, which is that how did God create the world? He spoke the world into being. God is, right? Yud Hey Vav Hey. We can't say it.
The rabbis would say he wrote it into being. Well, anyway.
Right. It is about the power of the word, right? The power of the word, not to quote the book of John, by the way. But so what is this telling us? What's the takeaway of this besides, oh my God, I'm so disturbed. My Saturday is going to be so infiltrated with all of this stuff. No. It shows us that even though we don't have the name anymore, we don't know how to say the name, we lost the pronunciation a long time ago, we do make the name real by how we relate to the world around us and the people around us. So that if we break the world into fractions and people into fractions and otherize, and if we judge people based on whether they're in or out, based on what they look like or speak, how they talk, or what they may believe, which denomination they belong to, Jewish or not, doesn't matter, then we are, in a way, profaning the potential of the name. So the name is big enough to include us all, every one of us. Maybe the lesson here is the entire peoplehood of Israel. All of us, all of you, all of us were Erev Rav, a mixed multitude. Nobody's as pure as they think, right? Not so. So don't start looking at others, right? And demarcating, who's in, who's out. We were all out. And because we were all outsiders, at some point in some time, God's name enables us all to be part of this place, this community, this process. It's a lot. I don't like the stoning part either. I will just say, this is one of the parts at one point that the rabbis say, Lo haya v'lo yihiyeh. This never happened and never will. Meaning, this is a place in Torah where it says, stone him to death. And the next line says, by the way, if you commit this act, you're going to be killed.
Hey, Jeffrey?
Yes.
I remember when Jesus was dealing with the woman that was caught in adultery, and that was what he said to them, if any of you without sin cast the first stone.
Right. Yeah. So that good Jewish boy, right? He wasn't going to throw the stone. right? So again, I've never said Torah is easy, by the way, folks. Never in my life. Next week, we're going to be in Bahar, and it's going to be, I think, a really important portion. We're going to be looking at the Jubilee year as it helps us find our place and go back home. So good to see everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of Shabbos and the weekend. Take good care.
Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Wait, be well.
Shalom,
Travel
everyone.
safe. Travel safe, my friend.
Shabbat
Shabbat shalom.
shalom.